Hey guys, welcome to this week's lesson. In this lesson, we're going to take you through a story of what the web is. What is the World Wide Web? And how does it correlate to the internet? What are the differences between the two? And then we're going to work our way up to actually creating some content using the structure of the web, which is really HTML, right? So we're going to learn a little bit about HTML and we're going to learn how to put together a basic website. So let's start off by backing up a bit and let's talk a little bit about the internet. What is the internet? So the internet is really a series of protocols stacked on top of each other to accomplish what we see today. Now, what does that mean? What is a protocol? A protocol, very kind of in an abstract way, is just a rule set for how two things communicate with each other. Like between you and I can come up to you and say, hey, how are you? You respond with, I'm doing good. How about yourself? That's kind of like a standard protocol for two people, maybe that don't really know each other, to introduce each other, right? What is your name? My name is, that type of thing. We can develop these types of protocols using computer systems and standardize them across different machines so that if one machine speaks a specific protocol with another one and they both agree on the version of the protocol, they can then integrate together and communicate with each other. So interestingly enough, there are many layers to this protocol stack. So one protocol may sit on top of another, etc., etc. And what we do is we call this a couple different things. So let me go ahead and just pull up my browser window here. And on the internet, we actually use a protocol stack called the Tcpip protocol stack, right? And it really consists of 4 layers. At the lowest level here, you have your data link layer. That's literally what your physical network card in your computer is. Now, on top of that, you have your network layer, which is where a protocol called IP comes into play. You guys have probably heard, what is your IP address? Oh, just give me your IP. Your IP address is literally a 4 numbers that come together that make an actual address. Think of it like your street address at your house, right? You tell somebody your address, they know exactly how to get mail to you. By having somebody's address, they know how to get information to you on the internet. That is the IP address. Now, on top of that sits another protocol in the transport layer called TCP. TCP is responsible for making sure that the data that we're sending to you to the address that we've specified actually gets there reliably and in the right order. Each one of these layers in and of itself is a huge topic, and you can actually spend an entire career in each one of these. There's a lot to be learned in each one of these layers. Now, on top of the transport layer is this applications layer. The applications layer is where certain protocols like HTTP lives. And that's really the one that we're focused on here. HTTP is really the protocol that powers the World Wide Web. So that brings us to our first distinction. What is the difference between the internet and the World Wide Web? So the internet, as you may or may not know, is basically just a collection of computers all networked together throughout the world, using this stack of protocols to accomplish the interconnectivity of all these computers, right? The data link layer, we have literally physical, well, there's actually a layer below this called the physical layer, which is literally the wires that are run all over the country and the world, and the wireless infrastructure and things like that. The data link layer basically brings the physical layer and the data together. That's why it's called the data link layer. So then as we build up from there, we have this large network of interconnected computers. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the internet is only the World Wide Web, right? We can think of the World Wide Web as a subset of the internet. It's really just the HTTP protocol running in the application layer. But there are other protocols that we can run on top of the internet, right? Like you can see on my screen here, there's a couple of examples like Telnet, FTP, email, right? Which consists of the SMTP protocol and POP. But HTTP is really what we're looking at now, right? We're inside of a browser right here, and we're consuming content off the internet, and the protocol that we are communicating with is called HTTP. Now, what does HTTP stand for? HTTP stands for Hypertext Transport Protocol, right? Notice how all these bad boys have a P at the end of them, for the most part, right? Protocol, protocol, protocol. So think of the internet as really a stack of protocols, and the World Wide Web is one of those protocols sitting on top of the transport layer, which is HTTP, and that lives within the application layer. Now, there's an extended view of this network stack called the Osi model. We're not going to go too much into this, but this extends this out into 7 layers instead of just the 4 layers that we just looked at. And you can see here we do have our physical layer in this depiction. Kind of just expands out the application layer for us into 2 other layers, the presentation and session layer. We don't really have to be too concerned with those right now. So where did HTTP come from? And this is actually a really interesting story. So HTTP came out of the CERN Institute in Switzerland. Now, if you have not heard of CERN, I'm going to go ahead and just Google it real quick here. CERN is the home of, I believe, the largest particle accelerator on the planet right now. In, thousands of years from now, we're going to look back at this time, and these are going to be kind of like our pyramids in terms of great achievements of humankind. CERN houses a huge particle accelerator, which is an amazing human achievement. And a lot of scientists have worked here for a long time. And what they do is they just basically shoot atoms at each other and explode them in this large accelerator, which is just blows my mind. That's crazy. And what they do is they actually read the data from the atoms, and they discover new things. Like they discovered this thing called the Higgs boson, which they believe is basically a force field that keeps all matter together. Insane stuff. But out of this institute in Switzerland, a researcher, this guy right here by the name of Tim Berners-Lee, wanted to figure out a better way to be able to share scientific information with his colleagues. So I believe he was on a Nginx system, which is one of the companies that Steve Jobs started after he was kicked out of Apple when he was around 30 years old. And on this system, he developed the first version of HTTP. And it basically was just a protocol. It's what we call a stateless protocol. It doesn't hold any state information, which means you can't, save anything in a sense of every communication is like a new communication. And he published this to his computer at CERN, and this is one of the first websites here. It's interesting on a nice green screen display, and this kind of took off at CERN, and other research institutes around the world started to stand up their own HTTP protocol servers. We call an HTTP protocol server basically just a web server. And there are various different types of software that run HTTP. 2 of the more popular ones right now is called Apache server, and this is the Apache project. This is a open source project. That means you can actually look at the source code and learn it and contribute to it. And it powers a large portion of the HTTP servers on the internet today. Another very popular one that's been coming up is called Nginx. And Nginx is a little different model in terms of its development. It's still open source. You can get in there and actually look at the code. This one is a newer but very popular HTTP server. These pieces of software run on computers that are connected to the internet and are literally listening for browsers, which are basically people operating the browsers, and in some cases bots, but to call upon them to say, hey, I want to get a website from you. Do you have this website? So once that happens, they send over the website information and it renders within your browser. So this happened in the mid 80s, I believe, in 1989, late 80s, while working at CERN. I'm going to go ahead and leave some of these links within the notes at the bottom of this video. But really interesting stuff. This took off, and he basically put out this software to the world and said, hey, this is for the world. And the world adopted it in a very, very, very big way. So the World Wide Web as we know it today is massive, right? It is huge. There are billions of sites, and where's I got a little, this is like a depiction of not just the World Wide Web, but this is the internet. I thought this was a cool visualization of all of the different connections and things like that. It's big, right? This almost makes me think about the map of the universe, right? If you've ever seen the map of the universe, which is a huge, let's see if this just comes right up here. Yeah, here it is. This is like the background electromagnetic radiation of the universe, right? This picture right here encompasses so much that our brains can't really even fathom how much this is. You know, these are like all galaxies, clusters of galaxies. So you can think of that in terms of the internet, right? The internet's probably actually very, very, very small compared to this image, but it's growing very quickly. And you can imagine a day where the internet is just this huge, it continues to grow exponentially. So that's basically a brief history of the internet. Now, the reason why I wanted to kind of give you this primer on the history of the internet and some of the software that's required to be able to achieve what we're achieving is just to give you an idea of where we're standing in this course. Where are we learning? Where is all the learning happening here? And really, it's happening on top of this layer. We're not going to be using HTTP directly. We're going to be basically creating the content that is served and passed over to us using HTTP. Okay? And that content typically is what we call HTML, right? That's the structure of the content. There's a couple other pieces of content, actually a lot of content that we can share over HTTP. But primarily when we're looking at a website, the structure of that website, right? The studs in the wall are HTML, right? So, and any website that you're on, like if we pop back here to the Apache project here, I'm in Chrome. If I just go ahead and right click any piece of content and go inspect, you can see here, it takes me right to a piece of HTML that I just basically said inspect. Now, everything you see here is HTML. This is the content that was given to us when we hit this web server by simply putting this address in and hitting enter. All the different protocols came into play, was routed back to a web server running somewhere in the world, and that web server said, awesome, you want to get my content? Here it is, and this is the content that it returned. You can actually see this in action by going to the network tab here, refreshing the page, and then clicking on the first thing in this list, and you can actually see the request and the response. This is HTTP. So these are the headers or the pieces of information that we sent to the web server to tell the web server what we wanted to get. Very powerful stuff. You can do a lot of stuff in this console tool, like performance tuning and all that type of crazy stuff. But right now, if we go back to this elements here, this is the HTML. And this is what we're focused on right now. This piece, these pieces of information. This is what enables us to create our own really properties on the web and share them with anyone in the world. Super, super powerful, right? So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into a brief introduction to HTML. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go over to StackStarter. So we want to go to this app.stackstarter.io. Let's get logged in there. You should have an ICG 150 course already. And we're going to go ahead and click Build. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm also going to click Run. All right, now once we hit Build, we should be brought into our editor here. And if you have any files open, you can go ahead and just close them. If you have any directories expanded, you can go ahead and just roll those up. We should see this, where we have 3 folders, a CSS folder, an images folder, and a libraries folder. And then 2 files, index.html and sketch.js. We're not really too concerned with sketch.js right now. We are concerned though with index.html. So let's go ahead and open that up. Now, what we see here is kind of a built-out version, built-out document, as we would call it in HTML. There are a couple of core sections in HTML that you need to be aware of, right? So we're looking at right now, if this is the first time you're looking at HTML, it's probably pretty foreign. What the heck are we looking at? There's a lot of, carrots going on, like greater than and less than. Is that what that is? Greater than, less than? I don't know. And then we've got quotes everywhere. We've got all these different links and scripts and P's. What the heck is going on here? Why don't we do this? Let's get everything and let's just delete it. We don't want to see it. Let's start here. Very simple. Nothing. A blank document. Now, it's important to note that we are literally just typing in a text editor. This is just text. You can type this in any text editor, really. So where do we start? What do we do here? So there are really 3 core sections to an HTML document, right? Those 3 sections are the opening HTML, right? And our editor will go ahead and close these for you. Now, what did we just do? We just defined what we call a new element. Now, this element is the parent element on the page. Everything in HTML is considered to be in some type of what we call a hierarchy, right? When you think of a hierarchy, think of this kind of tree structure in your mind. Very similar to like a directory structure on a computer, in a file system. We can also probably hack the spelling of it, but you can think of a hierarchy like this pyramid. That kind of works, but more of yeah, okay. So this is, I think of it more like this, right? Where we have this root, and then we have things branching off of the root, and then things branching off of that layer. And this can go on forever, right? So when we're talking about HTML, the root, what we call element, is HTML itself. So we say HTML. Now an element is comprised of opening up, we call opening it, and closing it. So everything has an opening and a closing. Now you open it using this notation, and you close it by using the same notation, but with a / right after this first bracket here. So now everything in between the HTML is basically a child of, or right below in terms of the hierarchy, this HTML. So if we go back to that image real quick, you can see everything that's inside of it is going to be sitting on this second level if we're using this kind of in our minds to visualize it. So that's the first core element that we need in HTML. The second is going to be our head section. So let's go open up a new element. It'll close it for us automatically. Now in the head section, this is where we put certain pieces of information that describe our document, right? We could do things like give our document a title. We can give our document some we call meta descriptions to basically describe it. This is used for search engines when they come around and they say, "Hey, what is your site about? What's going on with your site?" We can give it meta descriptions and stuff like that. Give it keywords and all that type of stuff. We can also bring in and link in other documents within the head section. This allows us to bring in other elements to the page, or I shouldn't say elements, other aspects of the page that maybe make our page look nicer using CSS, or maybe give us some functionality through JavaScript. So right now, all I'm going to do is I'm actually going to keep the head section blank. But now remember, because this is all a hierarchy, within the head section itself, we can also put other elements. Those elements are going to be children of both the head and the HTML. So if we're thinking about it in terms of a hierarchy, the HTML for any content in the head is like its grandparent, right? If you're thinking about like our families and stuff, right? So actually, let me do that. Let's go ahead and put a title. So I'm going to go ahead and use a title element, right? So I'm going to open up a new element and say title. I'm going to say my first web page. Okay, so now we have two core sections of our HTML defined. We've also included a title element. Now remember, everything that we've done so far is we're just defining elements on the page, right? So we have the HTML, we have the head, we have the title. Now we need the third core section. That third core section is going to be our body. So you can think of it like this. Think of it as like a human being in a sense, right? Human beings, we have our head and we have our body, right? And I don't need these headphones on right now. And in the case of HTML, the head and the body always has one parent, right? That is HTML. So HTML is the parent of all parents, right? It's the great-great-grandfather of the bunch, or whatever, however you want to look at it. But that is the root node in the hierarchy. So we have the HTML, we have the head, and we have the body. Those are the three core sections. Now within the body itself is where all of the content lives on the web, right? Well, I shouldn't say on the web, all the content that you see in the browser, right? If we go to any one of these sites that I have here, all of this content, if we inspect any of it, live right within that body. See all this stuff that's living in the body, right? So what we could do here is say, hey, my first web page. We'll put it here, right in the body. And now let's go ahead and go back to Stack Starter here and let's run it. If we click run, boom, there we go. We have my first web page. So this is our first website, and you can see that we have a title up here in the tab where it says my first web page, and we have my first web page in the content area, the body area of the site. Awesome. So that is the basic structure of an HTML document. Really not that complicated, right? Now from here, we can build upon these ideas, right? So we can build upon these ideas to create larger applications on the web. Right now, this is just a single website, but we're going to dive into things like how do we link pages together? How do we link to external pages? These are all things that make the web what the web actually is, right? That like actual web of content. One other thing I want to put on this page though, and I think it's important to note, is we're going to give it what's called a Doctype. So the first line here, I'm going to go ahead and open up with the exclamation point, and we're going to say Doctype HTML. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now, what this is going to do is this is basically going to tell the browser exactly what version of HTML we are using, right? So this is going to tell us whether or not it's an older version or a newer version. The newer version of HTML is called HTML5. And by saying just straight HTML in this Doctype, we're telling the browser explicitly that we're using HTML5 or the most recent version of HTML. This is important because there are a lot of pretty cool features that are in HTML5, like using the canvas, what we did with P5.js, video content, and a lot of other interactive content that we can use in HTML5. We don't need to really explicitly do this. Browsers, they do try to interpret the content and figure out what version it is for us. Doesn't always do a great job, so we'll just go ahead and include that. Actually, it usually does a pretty good job, but for now, we're going to just go ahead and put that in there. It's just good practice. So now with that in place, we can go ahead and start to build from here. Now, one really good resource that we're going to use a lot in this course is w3schools.com. W3 Schools is an excellent resource for learning pretty much the entire stack of technology that lives within the realm of web development, right? From HTML, CSS, JavaScript, to database applications using SQL and things like that. All very, very powerful stuff. There's a lot to learn here, right? So as you can see here, this HTML tutorial along the side takes us through a lot of what we're going to cover in this course. And this is going to be used by us during this course pretty explicitly. There's going to be a lot of different things we're going to do here. So as you can see here, we're on the home page of the HTML tutorial. And you can see here the first example looks pretty similar to what we just did, right? Two exceptions though. We have this H1 and paragraph tag. We have not, or P tag, I should say. I got ahead of myself. The P tag. So what are these doing for us, right? Let's go ahead and let's go into our document and let's go ahead and use these. So here I'm going to say this is an H1. And I'm going to go ahead and put this in here. And then I'm going to say paragraph. This is my first web page. And now let's go ahead and see what our website looks like. Look at that. It changed a little bit visually, right? And there's a couple of really important things that are happening here. Now this isn't visually stunning just yet, right? We don't have much in terms of visuals happening, but there are important distinctions by how we just structured our content using HTML. We tagged this content using the H1 tag, or what we call the heading 1 tag. The heading 1 tag basically tells the browser, and really visually tells us as the user, that this content is more prominent or more important than the content here in the P tag or the paragraph tag. Now, this is important for us visually because now we have some type of hierarchy in terms of the content, right? I think you're probably learning about some of that in some of your design principles courses as well, hierarchy of content. HTML lets us do that through different elements, the H1 being one of them. We have H1s, we have H2s, we have H3s, all the way up to H6s. And they all have different kind of default visuals in terms of what they look like. We can always overwrite them, and we're going to look into that later when we talk about CSS. Another really important thing that this does for us is for what we call accessibility. Now, accessibility is a really important topic that makes our web content that we put out more accessible to a wider audience, specifically people with disabilities. So say, for example, you are blind, right? We can't see, we don't have sight. How do we actually browse the internet? Well, a lot of times, these folks use what's called screen readers. Screen readers go and they actually read the structure of our page here. They understand how to interpret the H1s and the paragraph tags and then read the content to the user. So how does that help? Basically, by saying H1, we're telling a screen reader that the H1 content is important, and we need to actually include that first when we're reading the page. An amazing talk I saw a couple of years ago at a technical conference I was at was given by a gentleman that was blind. And he showed everyone in the room, there was hundreds of people in the room, how he sees the internet. And he went to two different sites. One site was horrible in terms of its accessibility, visually stunning. It looked beautiful to folks with sight. All images, really nice work, but it was completely non-usable for that particular person because he did not have sight. He then went to another site that had the proper markup, the proper HTML, and was tagged properly, and it read the site to him perfectly. He was able to browse around the site pretty much just as we would as a person with sight. So thinking about this stuff in terms of accessibility, which is really a whole topic in and of itself, is important at the start, right? If we're starting out right here at the ground level of developing web applications, knowing that your decisions here do matter not only to folks that have, sight here and all that type of stuff, but also to people that do not have those same capabilities. So I think it's really important to understand that right from the onset. So we have our first basic website here. It's not anything really visually stunning, but it is accessible, and we can share it with anyone in the world, right? I know one of the topics we're going to touch upon this semester is responsive websites, right? Like screen sizes on the web are very dynamic, right? And when we create designs and layouts and different types of websites, we do have to think about who is consuming them, not only for accessibility purposes, but also for screens, right? This screen's a lot smaller than the screen that we're looking at here. One cool thing about making websites this basic is that right off the bat, they're very accessible in terms of different screen sizes. So if I go, if I go ahead and right click here and go to inspect and go to, and click this little button here, device toggle, this is gonna actually simulate a device. In this case, I'm simulating the iPhone X. And I'm gonna go ahead and refresh this and make this 100%. And you can see it's actually accessible. We can see this on a device just fine. So let's go to different devices, Moto G4, Pixel 2, and you can do this is all just stock Google Chrome here, right in your browser. You can see how your site's gonna look on all these different devices. And you can see here, using our basic HTML, it's pretty accessible. So what I'd like you to do here, I'm going to end the class here, but what I'd like you to do is go ahead and browse around on this W3 School site and play around with some of the examples here. In the next class, what we're going to do is we're going to extend our knowledge of this and look at how to link different documents together. And we're going to look at specifically what are attributes on specific elements. All right, guys, any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You know where to find me.